إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله ربه بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله. أما بعد، فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله تعالى، وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، ألا وإن كل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. أما بعد، يقول الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم وأفضل القائلين: يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم، ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. I bear witness that there is none worthy of our worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is the seal of the prophets and the final messenger to all of humanity. Whomever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides, there is none to misguide, and whomever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leaves astray, there is none to guide aright. اليوم إن شاء الله نتكلم عن موضوع مهم تجدوه دائما في القرآن. الله سبحانه وتعالى دائما يتكلم عن التدبر وعن التفكر. فعادة لما تتكلم عن قصص الخلق أو نعم الله سبحانه وتعالى، تجد دائما في نهاية الآية: أفلا يتذكرون، أفلا يتدبرون كذا، ألا يتعظون، أشياء من هذا القبيل. أفلا تعقلون، قل سيروا في الأرض ثم انظروا. فالدعوة إلى النظر والتدبر في خلق الله موجودة دائما في القرآن. فالإنسان العاقل هو الذي يتعلم من كل إنسان ومن كل شيء، فيأخذ ما ينفع ويترك ما يضر، وهذا هو الموضوع اليوم إن شاء الله. So when you read in the Quran, you see there's an invitation everywhere in the Quran to think and reflect and ponder on the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see it everywhere in the Quran. So whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the creation, He talks about Iman or faith, He talks about the different things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, the lessons that He put everywhere, and the signs that He placed in the universe. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us to think and reflect. And you see it everywhere. Do they not think? Do they not reflect? Are they not mindful? Why don't they walk around in the land and think and reflect? You will see this almost on every page in the Quran. So there's an invitation to utilize the abilities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. Like the eyes, He says in the Quran, some people have eyes but they can't see. They have ears but they can't listen. They have hearts but they can't reflect. They have brains but they can't think. Yeah, we have all these organs, but we need to put them to use, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, as we will see in the examples I will give, some of them are very interesting, that you need to think and reflect and learn from everyone and from everything. Just look around you. So you can learn from human beings around you. You can learn from animals and birds and insects. You can learn from Muslims and non-Muslims and so on and so forth. Even plants, you can learn from them something. And the stories are so many in the Quran and also so many in the Hadith. When you read in the Quran, there's one thing you need to learn. When you hear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking in the Quran, because the Quran is the words of Allah. He's telling you to do things or to avoid things. If'al wa la taf'al. Recommendations and prohibitions. This is what the Quran is all about. Our problem is when we read the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do this or don't do this, you don't think He's talking to you. You think He's talking to your cousin. He's not talking to you. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do the halal and avoid the haram, He's not talking to me. When He says, pray and offer salah or zakat, He's not talking to me. This is why a lot of people are not listening, because they don't think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to them. The Prophet ﷺ, whenever he received an ayah from the Quran, do this or don't do this, he took it on himself to follow it. And the Sahaba, like when the Sahaba recited something in the Quran that talks about Jahannam, it is as if they are the ones who are falling into Jahannam and they start to cry. Whenever the Prophet ﷺ came across an ayah that talks about Jannah, he would ask Allah, oh Allah, give it to me. If he recites an ayah that talks about Jahannam, oh Allah, get me away from it. And the Sahaba did the same thing. Because they believed that the Quran came to them. Not to anyone else, it came to you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to you. He's communicating with you. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ says in the hadith, when you recite in salah, you say, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, my servant has praised me. When you say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, my servant has glorified me. So it's like a dialogue between you and Allah. Every time you say something, and Allah will respond to you. So if you want to talk to Allah, just read the Quran. He's talking to you. He's communicating to you. When you look at the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ and the things that you learn from him, you will learn that the Prophet ﷺ is all about hikmah. And hikmah in Arabic means wisdom. And wisdom is to do the right thing at the right time to the right people in the right way. This is what hikmah is all about. Every time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the sunnah or the way of the Prophet ﷺ, the way he thought and the way he did things and the way he behaved, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls it hikmah in the Quran. وَاذْكُرْنَ مَا يُتْلَى فِي بُيُوتِكُنَّ مِنْ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to the family of the Prophet ﷺ, Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them, remember what is being received in your homes of the ayatullah, the words of the Quran, the verses of the Quran, and the hikmah. And the ulama of tafsir, they say that the word hikmah here means the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. لَقَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ إِذْ بَعَثَ فِيهِمْ رَسُولًا مِّنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done a great favor when He sent the Prophet ﷺ from among the people to teach them the ayatullah, the words of Allah, and the hikmah. They say the words of Allah is Quran, the hikmah is the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So if you want to learn hikmah from Rasulullah ﷺ, just follow his example. You see how the Prophet ﷺ behaved in different circumstances. So this is something you learn from Rasulullah ﷺ. So whenever you listen to the Quran, Allah is talking to you. When you read about Rasulullah ﷺ, now you should think, what should I learn from him? His sunnah, his hikmah. Also, what can you learn from the Sahaba of Rasulullah ﷺ? The stories are so many, and we hear the stories every day. But a lot of people, they say or they take the stories of the Sahaba just for entertainment, as if you are watching a movie. But you are not acting upon it. You are not learning anything from it. So the right way to behave toward the Sahaba is to follow their example, to respect all of them, and to follow from their example, to learn from their sincerity and from their dedication. Every one of them did their best to help Islam and to give Islam dignity and honor. So you should ask yourself, what did I do to give dignity and respect to Islam? Did I do da'wah like the Sahaba? Did I follow the example of the Sahaba? Did I do my best, just like they did their best, to teach about Islam and to live Islam? It is easy to talk, but the Sahaba were not talking, they were living Islam. Islam was in their actions, Islam was in their behavior. And this is why hundreds of thousands of people accepted Islam, and they didn't even speak Arabic because they saw the Sahaba and they saw their attitude and their behavior. And so on and so forth. The stories are so many. Just read about what happened in India and China and all these places and Indonesia, how people accepted Islam. It was because of attitude, it was because of behavior and mannerisms. And this is something we can learn also from the Sahaba. You can learn from all the people around you. Old, young, men and women, Muslims, new Muslims, non-Muslims, animals and birds. You can learn from anyone. Just look around you. If you see a Muslim doing something good like ibadat, why should you not be like them? You should envy them in a good way, in a positive way, which is to be like them, to be as successful as they are. You can learn from all the people because they have lived long enough to have the experience, so we can learn from them. In my village, when I was there, I always used to sit with all people like my grandparents, and sit and talk to them, men and women. What do you advise me? What hikmah would you teach me? And I remember one of them once taught me something that I will never forget.
He said, I've lived for so many years, 65 or 70, and he said, one thing I learned through my life. If you put people under your feet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you put Allah over your head, Allah will put people under your feet. Which means you should only put Allah in your mind. You should always do things for Allah. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put people under your feet. And this is a figure of speech. If you keep Allah in your mind, don't worry too much about the people, because Allah will take care of them. But if you put the people over your head, Allah will put you to shame. So this is what he said. It's just deep. Just think about it. There's something you can learn from mothers. The dedication and the hard work. They work day and night. They never take days off. They never ask for whatever. They never ask for overtime. They never take days off, and they never complain. You can learn from new Muslims. I remember I learned one thing that I will never forget from a new Muslim brother. Because most of the time when you see a new Muslim brother or a new Muslim sister, oh, they don't know anything. They're just babies in Islam. There's nothing we can learn from them. But believe me, there are a lot of common values that you can learn from other people, even new Muslims and even non-Muslims. I think I shared with you one time, I learned something from a new Muslim that I will never forget. He told me he has learned through his life, he was like in his 20s, and he said, if you are grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will give you more to thank for. But if you keep whining and complaining, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you more to whine about. And I told him this is in the Quran, في Surah Ibrahim. وَإِذْ تَأَذَّنَ رَبُّكُمْ لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَئِن كَفَرْتُمْ جَحَدتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ. It's the exact same thing. But he didn't remember reading it in the Quran because he was a new Muslim. And I said, this is hikmah from the Quran. And this is something you have come to realize after living for so many years. You can also learn from non-Muslims. Alhamdulillah, we have so many good Muslims, but there are some things you can learn from non-Muslims as well. The people that you work with, the people you study with, you can learn from them discipline and being on time. And this is something I keep reminding ourselves about. That sometimes we're not very particular about time. People would say, okay, we'll come to you for counseling at 6 o'clock, they come at 7:30. Okay, it's not a big deal. When are you going to come to visit me for lunch? Oh, I'm going to come after Asr. And after Asr, they come like 5 minutes before Maghrib. Technically, it's still after Asr, but the sense of time is not there. The discipline is not there. So this is something we can learn. Learning from animals, the animal kingdom, is a different story. You can spend weeks to learn from them in matters of life and also in matters of religion. So say, for example, where did we learn building dams from? It's from animals, like the beaver. Where did we learn to store food in the winter time? Where did we learn to fly? Or where did we learn to make the chopper, the helicopter, to go back and forth and all? From the dragon flyer. And this is what the scientists say. Where did you learn to make magnificent architecture? It's from ants and bees. The first lesson I learned in how to make a feasibility study, I learned from a donkey in the village in Egypt. And please don't laugh, because it is true. So back in the day, we used to go to the farm, and there was a road, a tiny road, and they had a small channel of water, and through the road they have smaller like channels, branches, so the water will go to the farm and irrigate the farm. So every few steps you will see a small channel, right, of water. So what we did basically, we would carry stuff on the back of the donkey, and you will ask the donkey to cross this channel. If it is tiny, if it's small, no problem, the donkey will just jump. But if it is big enough, the donkey will go back a step or two, and it will make calculations whether I'm going to be able to jump this channel of water or no. If it is jumpable, or if it is doable, then the donkey will jump. If it is not doable, even if you kill the donkey, he will never do it. In our case, sometimes I'm carrying stuff. Oh, it's easy, I can jump it. I jump, I land in the middle of the channel. But you learn from working with these guys right there that you have to study, you have to look, and you have to make calculations before you jump. So this is something we learn from them. And the stories are so many in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us in the Quran that animals and birds and insects are more grateful to Allah, they are more loyal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than many humans. You read in Surah Al-Hajj. أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ يَسْجُدُ لَهُ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَالشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرُ وَالنُّجُومُ وَالْجِبَالُ وَالشَّجَرُ وَالدَّوَابُّ وَكَثِيرٌ حَقَّ عَلَيْهِ الْعَذَابُ وَمَنْ يُهِنِ اللَّهُ فَمَا لَهُ مِنْ مُكْرِمٍ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَفْعَلُ مَا يَشَاءُ. Don't you see that to Allah submits everything in the heavens and the earth? The sun, the moon, and the stars, and the planets, and the trees. What dawab? The word dawab in Arabic means every living being on earth. Whether we're talking about animals, whether we're talking about birds or fish or insects, all of this is called dawab in Arabic. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after saying that all of this submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the animals, the birds, everything, all of them, and many people submit and many people refuse. So this is what makes us different from animals and birds, that all of them submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they obey Him, many of us don't. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us in the Quran, أَمْ تَحْسَبُ أَنَّ أَكْثَرَهُمْ يَسْمَعُونَ أَوْ يَعْقِلُونَ إِنْ هُمْ إِلَّا كَالْأَنْعَامِ بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلُّ سَبِيلًا. Do you think that all these people around you, they can listen and they can reason? No, they are like animals, and they are even less guided than animals. Why? The ulama of tafsir, they say that it is not a comparison here. Allah is not saying that these people are worse than animals, because it is not af'al tafdeel here. He's saying that the animals basically are better than some humans. I don't believe in the theory of evolution, Darwinism, but sometimes I believe that some humans evolved from cow, and some humans evolved from dog, and so on and so forth. Why? Because they behave worse than these animals. So the ulama of tafsir, they say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not telling us that these animals are bad, He's telling us that these humans are not as good. How? They say the animals that they know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who created them, He is the one who provides for them, and He is the only one they thank. In our case, yeah, we know that there's someone who is running the show, but when it comes to time to ibadah, to thank Allah, not so many people thank. وَقَلِيلٌ مِنْ عِبَادِيَ الشَّكُورِ. Allah says, very few of humans give thanks to Allah. When was the last time you saw a dog making sujood to another dog or a statue of a dog? You never see it. In the morning, living in the village, you wake up in the morning and you heard the hymns of the birds, aswat al-asafir. And it happens sometimes when I listen to a recitation by Sheikh Abdul Basit or Sheikh Husari, when you fast forward the tape, the old style, it sounds exactly like birds. So I say, subhanAllah, maybe the birds are reading their salah or maybe they are reading Quran, who knows? And when goose and the geese and the ducks, they fly for immigration about this time or the winter time, you see them, they're flying like a V shape, like the V shape. And they're always following someone in the front. And I say, maybe when they are flying, they're actually in salah, and this duck in the front is the imam duck, or the imam goose. Maybe, who knows? Allah A'lam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us in the Quran, He's giving us example to show us what we can learn from these animals. Can you believe that the whole ummah in Yemen, in Saba, accepted Islam because of the bird? The hudhud, the hoopoe in the story for Surah Al-Naml. So the bird came to Sulaiman and said, look, and the hudhud, the hoopoe was pulling his hair off. He said, can you imagine that these people, they are making sajda to the lady and they are worshipping the sun instead of Allah? Even the bird realized this. He said, what is this? This is nonsense. So So he went, he took the letter from Sulaiman, the story is there in the Quran, and he gave him the letter. Eventually they accepted Islam before of a burn. I know some Muslims, they are the reason why a lot of people are leaving Islam. They are not making da'wah. No, they are the reason why people are leaving Islam. I remember one time, maybe I told the story, one of the brothers came to me, and he used to work in Fort Mac in Alberta, Fort Make Money. So he said, you know what, I'm an idiot. And I said, why you think this? He said, well, a brother who was non-Muslim, he used to live with us, and eventually he accepted Islam. But we were like 5 or 6 living with him, and we started to teach him contradictory things. We made his life difficult. So in the morning, one of them would say, you know what, brother? You know you're a new Muslim, you need to learn. The most important thing in Islam is the beard. Then at night, another person would say, forget about the beard. The most important thing in Islam is the biha halal. So they started to confuse him, and this brother came to me and he said, eventually this brother, we made his life difficult. He was not learning anything. Eventually he left Islam. So he said, what do you call me? And I said, well, I call you an idiot, just like you said at the beginning. You see? So we need to start with the priorities and so on and so forth. You read in the Quran that an ant was the reason why the kingdom of ants was saved from destruction. Right? In the story in Surah Al-Naml. قالت نملة يا أيها النمل ادخلوا مساكنكم لا يحطمنكم سليمان وجنوده. So the ant was working في الأمر بالمعروف والنهي عن المنكر just to save her people, right? And you see Muslims, they do something wrong in front of them, they never talk. And they even contribute to the killing and the destruction of other Muslims. You just read the news and you will get depressed for the whole year. How Muslims are shedding the blood of other Muslims. You read in the Quran, in Surah Al-Fil, that an elephant refused to destroy the Kaaba out of respect for the house of Allah. Then you read stories about how many thieves are caught every year during the Hajj season. They buy tickets, thousands of dollars, they travel miles and miles, and they go there to steal money from other pilgrims. And they have tactics and techniques, they cut things and they steal in the haram, in the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the stories are so many. You read in the Quran where we learn how to honor the dead. We didn't learn it from other human beings, we learned it from the ghurab, the crow. Surah Al-Ma'idah, the crow taught Qabil how to bury the dead body of his brother. This is something we didn't know. So the stories are so many. When you reflect on these stories, these animals and birds and insects, they put us to shame. Then when you read also about plants, the plants, if you're a farmer or you plant something in your backyard, you take the seed, it doesn't matter in which direction you put the seed, upside down, to the right or the left, under a rock, it doesn't matter. The seed will come out, the plant facing up to the sky. It doesn't matter. So in your case, if things put your life upside down, you should always turn to Allah. Raise your hands and say, Ya Allah, help me. Just like the plant. There are so many things we can learn. All you need to just open your eyes, open your heart, and look around and learn. That's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
الحمد لله رب العالمين واشهد ان لا اله الا الله وحده لا شريك له واشهد ان محمدا عبده ورسوله ارسله ربه رحمه للعالمين. The last thing I'm going to say, just a couple of minutes inshallah. We listen to a lot of things about Islam. We come to classes and we come to khutbah al-Jum'ah, at least khutbah al-Jum'ah. So if you come to khutbah al-Jum'ah regularly, this means that you listen to 52 khutbahs every year. If you have been coming to khutbahs for 10 years, this means you have listened to 520 khutbahs, right? And if you have been coming for 20 years, this is over 1,000 khutbahs, and so on and so forth. You do the math. Believe me, if you just apply 1 or 2% of what you learn from the khutbahs, this will take you somewhere else. It will raise you in rank. It will give you the knowledge that you need in your life. Because the scholars or the khutbah always talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and tawheed and so on and so forth. So the stories are so many and the khutbahs are so many. But the most important thing is how do you receive the khutbahs?
and how do you apply them to your life. So when you go to a khutbah, when you hear a story, you should not listen to it because it entertains you. You should learn it or learn something from it. And this is the point behind the story. Be like the Sahaba radhiyallahu anhum. When they heard something, they started immediately to apply. You hear the stories about changing the qibla, or the prohibition of wine, or the hijab story in the Quran, and so forth and so. What the Sahaba did immediately, as soon as they heard something, they started to apply, because this is the most important thing. I'm going to conclude with the story of Dumad ibn Asad ibn Tha'laba al-Azdi. One of the Sahaba, that was his name, Dumad. So he came to the Prophet ﷺ, and that man, he used to work in magic, and he was a fortune teller, so he heard stories about the Prophet ﷺ. So he came, he was from Bani Azd, Dumad ibn Tha'laba al-Azdi. So he came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, I heard stories about you. They say you're a poet, they say you are a madman, they say this, they say that about you. So, would you give me the chance to say something so I can cure you from the magic that is overwhelming you? So the Prophet ﷺ said, listen to me. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. We say this introduction to every khutbah, every Jum'ah. So the man said, the Prophet ﷺ told him, I praise Allah and I seek His help and assistance. Whoever Allah guides, there is none to misguide. And whenever Allah leads astray, there is no one to guide, and so on and so forth. 2 lines. So the man said, will you please repeat this to me? The Prophet ﷺ repeated it 3 times. Then the man said, Wallahi, I've never heard anything more beautiful than this. And he said, give me your hand, and he took shahada. On the spot. I'm talking about the introduction to the khutbah. I'm not talking about the khutbah, just the introduction. Inna alhamdulillah. The man took shahada because of the 2 lines that we say every Jum'ah in the introduction. What about the rest? So we need to listen with an open heart, an open mind, and we need to apply and teach those who are around us. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يعلمنا ما ينفعنا وما ينفعنا ويعلمنا. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى في هذا اليوم العظيم المبارك ربنا لا تدع لنا ذنبا إلا غفرته ولا هما إلا فرجته ولا مريضا إلا شفيته ولا ميتا إلا رحمته ولا مظلوما إلا نصرته ولا ظالما إلا خسرته. اللهم اغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us sincerity in everything we say and do. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the best in this life and the best in the life to come. وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.